Hello, podcast fam. I am thrilled to share some exciting news. My book, So Grow Lead, is officially live on Amazon. This book is more than just my story of starting a nonprofit and building a peanut butter factory in Malawi. So trust me, the ups and downs of that journey are worth the read. It's also packed with practical strategies to help nonprofit leaders like you tackle challenges with clarity, courage, and a whole lot of heart. If you've ever wondered how to turn your vision into reality, navigate the inevitable hurdles, and build something meaningful, whether in your organization or in your own life, this book is for you. I'd be so grateful for your support in spreading the word. Grab your copy of So Grow Lead in the show notes and on Amazon today. Let's keep sowing seeds of impact together. Are you a nonprofit professional who's feeling overwhelmed and burnt out? Well, welcome to the Lead with Heart podcast. I am your host, Haley Cooper. On this podcast, we will share stories of leadership, courage, and empathy that'll help you learn to take care of yourself, your staff, organization, and community. You will hear from nonprofit leaders who have been in your shoes and have learned best practices to raise more revenue and make a greater impact. Let's thrive together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Lead with Heart podcast. I am selfishly really excited about this conversation because, like I was talking to Patton before this, I have been following him for a while, and I always feel like it's creepy when I say that, but we're in 2024, and that's just what you do these days. He has been invaluable in my own path to nonprofit leadership. Patton is a nonprofit expert, best-selling author, consultant, and coach. He founded PMA Nonprofit Leadership in 2009 and has worked with nearly 275 not-for-profit organizations on their leadership development, fundraising, and strategic planning. So I know we have a lot to talk about because I love to talk about all of those things. So welcome, Patton.
Haley, delighted to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So I would love to know, is like starting this conversation, a little bit more about your path to nonprofit leadership. I know that's the name of your book, and that's mainly what we're going to be talking about. How did you get into fundraising, and how did that lead you to where you are today?
Thank you for the question. I was fortunate as a college student. I had an opportunity for an internship, didn't know what I was going to do. Someone suggested to me Special Olympics International had an internship program in Washington, D.C. And so I was like, all right, that'll be fun. A summer in D.C. can't be too bad. But what it did, Haley, was open up an absolute career opportunity, a literal career path, because I realized the nonprofit sector had such potential for career development. I was able to work there when Eunice Kennedy Shriver, the founder, was still actively involved. And so I was fascinated and so impressed with her brilliant vision for a global movement, which Special Olympics is to this day. And so I was like, wow, this is more than just an internship. Even though I had some people say, and I bet some of your listeners that are in nonprofit can appreciate this. So people are like, all right, Patton, that's great, but when are you going to get a real job? And I was like, this is a real job. And there are real opportunities in this profession. And sure enough, I stayed there and ended up working 2 more years, came into North Carolina and worked at the state office, and then continued and got even more in the fundraising for about 10 years in higher education fundraising. I led fundraising teams at 2 universities. And so I have been bitten by the nonprofit bug and then started my consulting practice as a result of 20 years of that experience to say, you know what, this sector needs good people to stay in it. And maybe among the things you and I'll talk about, my greatest fear is the turnover that plagues our sector. We're losing good people for maybe a variety of reasons, but I'm trying to do a small part and help those that are talented and have so much to offer and keep them in the sector so they can seek investment, help these organizations achieve their missions. And I know that's been part of your story as well. So excited to talk about it, but that's literally how I got involved.
I love that. And yes, many times that I've been in a nonprofit role, people always ask me if I'm paid or a volunteer. It's one of
Exactly.
my favorite questions. And I'm like, no, I'm a paid staff member
It's a real job.
to do this
It's a real
work.
job.
Yeah, so it's always fun to educate people on what it means to work in nonprofits and like what a nonprofit is. And I think a lot on this podcast, we do talk about turnover and the idea of investing in nonprofit leaders. And I think personally, that's one of the reasons why there is such a high turnover in this sector. But everyone has a different perspective on turnover and what it means. So I would love to know some of the trends that you see in your work that you do that results in turnover.
It's a great question, and certainly compensation is part of it. But I think that's an easy answer sometimes to dismiss it as, well, nonprofit doesn't pay enough, so that's why people leave. I would contend that's not often the reason they leave. Number one, to me, is unrealistic expectations. I talk to many nonprofit talented fundraisers and leaders who say to me, love the organization, love the mission, but they're asking me to do 3 jobs for the price of one. And that is unrealistic. And the mission passion will carry you only so long. And as Haley, I don't know what the latest statistic, fundraisers are turning over every 16 months, 18 months on average.
Yeah.
But regardless of the actual number, the fact is, it's not that there's a kind of negative connotation that many fundraisers are just jumping for more salary. Maybe some are. But I would say many of them are truly committed to the cause, but they leave because the unrealistic expectations, which again, I believe is a leadership issue, organizations that don't organize themselves such that talented people can succeed. And the other thing you alluded to, which is we don't have the professional development that other for-profit sectors do. And so I think ultimately talented people want to grow personally and professionally. And if our sector would do that better, we would retain the talent we have.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. And I also have been having conversations with recent CEOs, and this conversation always comes up with in terms of unrealistic expectations and a generation a change where
Yes.
the new generation that is coming into the workplace is putting in stronger boundaries, and it's harder to view them as team players because they're saying, I'm going to work my job. And when nonprofits, there's a level of being a team player, but also committing to your role and doing it well and delivering on your outcomes, right? So how have you seen the generational shift impact the way that leadership approaches expectations in the roles?
It's a fair question and fair point, right? That our parents' generation tended to stay at their jobs much longer. And so there's that kind of, what about this younger generation and their willingness to jump around? But I still see, regardless of the generational influence, that there's a commitment to our sector. And I think it's not just the kind of more senior folks that stay in place and the others are jumping around. I've looked at, Haley, these 3 distinct kind of generations of leaders in the nonprofit space. And I think there's similarities, but there are also differences. And I've enjoyed working in each of them. There's what I would call the emerging leader. And what's fascinating to me and encouraging is that preponderance of undergraduate and graduate programs in nonprofit management, philanthropic studies, whatever you call it. Even 10 years ago, there weren't that many of them. But now I would almost guarantee any university you can think of has or is working on their program, both undergraduate and graduate, in philanthropic studies or nonprofit management, offering certificates and degrees. So that is a long way of saying there is a whole wave of talented individuals emerging in our sector that signed up for it. Unlike myself, I didn't know what I want to do. I got lucky that I had an internship, right? But that is a sector we need to capture. And I'd ask every listener, if you're a nonprofit leader, what are you doing to attract and retain the emerging leaders that are at the universities in your town and city right now? Do you have an internship program? What are you offering to bring some of this talent into the fold? But that's the first way. I think there's another section of leadership, what I would call the mid-career plateau. And maybe that's what you were referring to, Haley, in the previous question too, that they've been doing it for 10 years, but they're burned out or they feel like they've hit a ceiling. And they, though, have potential for greater leadership? What are we doing to help them develop so that they can ultimately lead an organization and not just be a director? And then, like you and I were talking about earlier, there is that older generation, and it's no secret that I think the pandemic kept many of our most senior leaders in place. They didn't want to leave during a crisis, but let's face it, now they're like, all right, I'm more than ready to retire and either go into consulting or simply get out. And so there are three distinct, I think, generations we need to think about.
Imagine a fundraising partner that not only helps you raise more money, but also supports you in retaining your donors. A partner that helps you raise funds both online and on location so you can grow your impact faster. That's DonorBox, a comprehensive suite of tools, services, and resources that give fundraisers just like you a custom solution to tackle your unique challenges, helping you achieve the growth and sustainability your organization needs, helping you help others. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. Yeah, I think that's such an important point. And I think when you're talking about like how do we retain the emerging leaders or the like at any level, I saw someone on LinkedIn, I don't remember who it was, but they talked about how as it relates to fundraising and leadership, donor retention is a staff retention issue. And I thought
Great
that was
point.
such an important perspective because as we know, our ultimate goal is to be good stewards of our money. And we are fiscally responsible for the money that comes into our organizations. But high turnover equals high cost fundraising, right? So be imperative for us to focus on retaining our staff so that we retain our donors, because we know with the turnover, we lose that trust, we lose that relationship, and it takes time to build. Like I know it can take anywhere from 6 to 8 months to build that rapport with a donor once you start a position. So what are your thoughts on how staff retention plays into that idea of donor retention?
100% agree. I hope leaders at the board level and at the executive level are thinking about that. It's not just the direct cost that you lose by having to replace someone, the literal cost of hiring someone, the transition, the search firm if you're using one. But you're exactly right. It's the donor who now starts rolling their eyes. All right, you're the third fundraiser I've met from this organization in the last 5 years. And I'm going to be more wary. I'm going to be less likely to retain my giving because I don't know you. And so I wish more organizations would calculate, you know what, maybe I should just pay my fundraiser a little bit more, keep them here because the multiplier effect of their relationship building activity is huge. I don't know, Haley, if you're seeing more evidence of that, I think there's greater awareness, but it still just boggles my mind that organizations would let a talented fundraiser walk because they're not willing to pay $5,000 more dollars.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I also think it's important to have the conversation with the board. So I would love to know how you coach leaders on the discussion around the importance of investing in nonprofit leaders or fundraisers, because I've had other people on this podcast and we talk about how they were in the corporate culture. And from the beginning of their career in corporate culture, they were assigned a mentor. Their investment in their leadership was paid for. They had a trajectory that they set out and they were supported. But I think there's a stigma in nonprofits, and I've seen this locally in a few of the nonprofit development spaces that I've been in, that I don't really know what the stigma is, but there's something about investing in the people in your mission that deliver on your mission. So how do you coach leaders to have those conversations with boards?
Yeah, we've got to break down the stigma. You said it well. And of course, Dan Pallotta famously alluded to it in the overhead myth and the movie now, right, Uncharitable, which I think many older generations, I don't mean to generalize, but charitable work was intended almost to be volunteer work. And even those that worked for charities, I think there was an expectation they're not expected to make much money, therefore they shouldn't ask for more. I think that is changing, but that's exactly where I start. When I sit with the board, I'm like, everyone you've hired and your organization, you're investing in them. So why would you not expect a similar approach from leadership here at this nonprofit? Why are you going to make us skimp in terms of investing in our people or the infrastructure we need? Again, the rally cry in that old day was, well, I want all my money to go to program. Well, your money's not going to go anywhere if we can't operate a program effectively. And so usually I try to put, assuming a board is largely corporate or for-profit professionals, I'm trying to ask them to think about, if you were running your business like this, you would fail.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So why would you not want the power of this nonprofit to also succeed? And hopefully they can even see the bottom line value that, yes, we're going to invest more, but if we can double the number of people we serve, isn't that a positive result? So doesn't get through to everybody, but Haley, I hope you're seeing some progress on that front as well.
Yeah. And I had someone on my podcast from Groundswell, who's a local organization that upped the salaries of every nonprofit employee because they saw that people couldn't afford to live in Orange County, where the minimum salary to afford a one bedroom is $75,000. And that they were also seeing burnout. And so they were allowing people to take sabbaticals, not just after they earn the 10-year or the 20-year badge. It's like regularly ingrained in their culture because their mission is to serve the community. And I think there's been a cultural shift across nonprofits where the mission is served now internally as well. It's not just about delivering on the mission in the community because our nonprofit staff is a part of the community.
Love to hear that. I hope we're both going to hear more examples like that. Because let's face it, many of our nonprofit friends don't take their vacation days anyway, right? So we've got to almost encourage that so they can keep balance in their life and remain effective in their jobs.
Yeah, I definitely think that's so important. And you wrote a book, Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership, and you also have a podcast named the same thing. And it talks about 7 keys to advancing your career in the philanthropic sector. And one of the first things that you start off with is identifying your leadership goals. So what are some of the steps that you take to help a leader take a step back and identify their goals?
I do what I call a vision framework exercise, because I think a lot of times that question is posed with the vague, sometimes far, what do you want to do when you grow up kind of question. And so I have broken it down in our mastermind program and outlined in the book. Let's answer the questions you can answer. You may not know what you want to do 3 years, 5 years, certainly 10 years from now, but there are some questions in the vision framework. I'm trying to say, do you want to stay right there in Orange County? Or would you move for a good opportunity? Do you like the sector you're in? You're in education. Would you consider healthcare? Or maybe you're committed to education. That's fine. I walk folks through this framing device of questions so that they can say, all right, I still need to work on some of these things. In other words, you don't have to have the answers to all. But I find people get bogged down in the enormity of what am I going to do next? I'm not sure. So what I'm trying to do and suggest to your listeners as well, let's answer the questions we can answer. Some of you can't move because your family's where it is, right? Others of you might consider a move or might consider another sector for the right opportunity. So my hope is, I call it sharpening your vision as a means to help someone at least point in the right direction, and then we can build a plan to help them.
Yeah, and I think that's so important too, is like people then start to, once you start talking about your vision, you share it with someone, you write it down, it can become a reality. And people can start to plan that future now. And I think that's so important to be able to take the steps that it needs to take. And obviously it can change based on circumstance, but your dream can start taking action.
That's so well put. And in fact, that's where I think people get bogged down. But then when you point them in the right direction, say, all right, you want to be an executive director someday? You think you'll need a graduate degree maybe to enhance your potential as a candidate? All right, let's think about a 3-year plan to get you there. What are the programs in your area that offer graduate work? And so maybe that is the kind of progression to get you there. I just don't want people to be stuck. And I sadly run into a lot of folks. I'm sitting over coffee and they're like, I love nonprofit work, but I'm just miserable where I am now. And now what? And I'm like, hey, that's not going to help. Let's start with a direction, as you just said, Haley. Let's point you in a direction. Let's map it out. And that's what, again, I was trying to do in the book.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think naming it too helps people get unstuck and try to
Right.
get that.
Right.
And also helping having the support of someone there to cheer them on and hold them accountable and help chart that path forward is essential as well.
I got a whole chapter, Haley, on that. The power of strategic networking. It's exactly what you just described. Surrounding yourself both with comparable peers. In fact, I suggest people look for two in that category and also two individuals that would be aspirational peers. When I first started at Special Olympics, immediately I started talking to people. Like, all right, I'm new, I'm a rookie. Who do I need to talk to and learn from? And they're like, oh, yeah, you need to talk to Susan in Colorado and you need to talk to Mark in New Jersey. And I was like, all right. And sure enough, and I think this is what's great about our sector too, people that are senior to us often are very generous. If we ask nicely, they can provide both inspiration and accountability. And so I've always tried to build on that because I was very fortunate to have senior people in my jobs help me out. And so hopefully we can continue that culture throughout the charitable sector.
Yeah, I would love to talk a little bit more about this idea of strategic networking. And I was just on a mentorship call before we hopped on this conversation with a board member that I'm on the board with. And we were talking about this idea of strategic networking and what feeling do we want to evoke in these spaces where we create an environment of networking. And one of the things that came up was transparency and allowing people not only to commiserate, like we can talk about problems in the nonprofit sector all day
Yes.
long. That's why I have a podcast.
Yes.
But also to celebrate each other and not feel alone. And I think in leader or whatever role you feel in, you can feel really lonely. And so it's been imperative in my career to have a networking system. And I'm not the best networker. I'm an introvert, but I've created systems where I can build a network. So what is this idea of strategic networking and what's the first step that someone can take to start to build that environment around them?
Yeah, a couple things. We'll love that you're lifting it up because I do think there's such power in the network, even for those of us that are introverted. And it takes, though, the courage to step forward. First thing I would do is suggest you have what I call strategic interviews every month. The power of the social network, frankly, that you and I connected through, is an opportunity to reach out to someone and say, hey, I admire the work you're doing. Would you be willing to jump on a 30 or 45-minute Zoom with me? And I've got 3 or 4 questions I'd like to ask you. I've almost never been declined on a respectful inquiry like that. And I have made wonderful connections all over the world now. And so strategic networking, because of the technology available to us, even back in the day when it was just a phone call, but you can have that. And some people, you may have just a great conversation. That's the end of it. Often, and if you do 2 or 3 of those a month, I guarantee that a fraction of that number might become ongoing contacts and a friend, an alliance, a partner, or whatever. I'm also so networking interviews on a regular basis, looking for both comparable and aspirational peers that give you a framework of somebody else that understands your world. Because you're right, Haley, it's a lonely world and we can feel isolated. Also, I want aspirational peers. I want somebody who's been there 5 years ahead of me. And then what I've done and created this framework also in the book is I create a personal board of directors to make clear you need your friends and family network, but I'm suggesting a bit more strategic assembly of, I'm suggesting 7 people that can directly address areas that you want to work on and support you on your path to nonprofit leadership. So in other words, as a rookie at Special Olympics, the financial stuff was terrifying to me. Right? I was a liberal arts major coming out of college, felt really good on the program side, felt good about lots of it. But when the budget report came around, I was like, uh-oh, now what? Well, I recruited a friend of mine who was an accountant. And that was just like we recruit people for our nonprofits to fill certain skills and experiences. Why don't we do it for ourselves? So he was perfect. I could get the material in advance of the board meeting and say, hey, would you mind helping me? What do I need to look for on this? And I got better. And it helped me. So again, to respond to your question, Haley, building your own personal board in response to the skills and experiences you want to develop. And then last but not least is the concept of a mastermind. I am a
Mhm.
huge fan now. Napoleon Hill, I think, identified it 80 years ago as a concept, creating a safe space of like-minded peers that can hold you accountable, can encourage you, can allow you to vent if you need to. But we've started one 3 years ago, and it's been remarkable to put talented nonprofit leaders from across the country in a space where they can share their challenges, encourage each other, provide resources, talk to each other in a way that is helpful. And I hope your listeners will consider the power of a mastermind in their whatever context they're in, because I'm worried the isolation is what leads to, all right, I'm going to do something else. And we're going to lose talented people because they're not connected.
Isolation and loneliness are an epidemic that have happened over the last couple of years, and it leads to
Absolutely.
burnout. It leads to illness. It can be more deadly than some cancers. And so I think it's very important to identify and address those issues so that we can prevent as much as we can some of the things that can result as that idea of isolation and loneliness.
100%. And again, I'm glad you are lifting up this and creating community through your podcast and through the work you do. We need that because, again, I'm concerned about that loneliness factor that you mentioned. And I want to tell people that, hey, don't feel as isolated as I know you do, because there's somebody else that likely is dealing with some of the same things.
Yeah, definitely. And I love this idea of developing a personal board of directors. My husband's a CPA, so he does all my accounting and budgeting. And
He's on your board for that, right?
yes, he's done many Excel spreadsheets for me because I'm like sitting there for an hour trying to do it. And here's one formula and it all works out. But when I was starting my own consulting business, that's what I did. I developed a personal board of directors, whether they knew it or not, but to reach out and pitch the idea behind what I wanted to do and the gaps that I had. So it was like, this is the chart, the path, and getting their advice, because what I was doing was very niche. And it was like, do you think this will resonate? And are there ways that you can support me in the gaps? And it was really helpful and gave me that confidence to step out on my own.
Great example. And that's a perfect illustration of what I think it can provide.
Hey there, podcast family. If you're like me and deeply committed to improving your leadership skills and fostering better connections with your team, I've got something truly amazing to share with you. I'm proud to introduce the EMC Masterclass, something I talk about often as a certified trainer. It's an incredible program developed by the renowned Dr. Lola Gershfeld, an organizational psychologist and corporate emotional connection expert. You might remember her from a podcast episode where she shared invaluable insights into the world of emotional connection. Dr. Gershfeld's EMC Leaders courses are designed for anyone working with people, whether you're a manager, supervisor, team leader, educator, coach, mentor, or a team member. This program is truly for everyone looking to enhance their communication and collaboration skills to raise more revenue for their mission. Now, let me tell you why the EMC Masterclass is a game changer. Dr. Gershfeld's groundbreaking emotional connection process has been integrated into top universities' curriculum and recognized by international organizations like ICF, HRCI, and SHRM. Humans are wired to seek emotional safety, and when we feel safe, we're more likely to take risks, share innovative ideas, and collaborate effectively. The EMC process is the catalyst for creating that emotional safety within your team. The virtual EMC Masterclass consists of 8 modules with 4 hours of expertly recorded material, 13 quizzes to reinforce your learning, and a workbook filled with activities for offline practice and something I still refer to daily. Ready to become an emotional connection master? Dr. Gershfeld is offering an exclusive detail for our podcast listeners. Use the code LEADWITHHEART to enjoy a generous 10% discount on the EMC Masterclass. Head over to emcleaders.com and enroll in the EMC Masterclass today. So you also talk about in your book, and I'm definitely going to have to add it to my cart and read it. But what I think everyone has different ideas of leadership skills. And this is why I love having a podcast, because everyone approaches leadership and leadership skills differently. So what are some of the essential leadership skills that you've identified that are crucial in nonprofits?
Yeah, in fact, the whole principle of these leadership skills is a willingness to self-assess. And so,
Mm,
first and foremost, I'm saying the most effective and successful leaders I see are willing to evaluate their skills and experience and continue to get better. And so, I guess that's the kind of foundation on which I've built. In the book, I talk about 10 essential skills and experiences. I've actually expanded the list to include a couple others. So now it's a dozen. But there are things like in nonprofit leadership, financial acumen, what you and I both perhaps need other people to help us with sometimes. But if you're ultimately going to lead a nonprofit, you're going to have to run a business,
yeah.
right? And so I share that because a lot of nonprofit leaders come up through the program side or the fundraising side or whatever. But ultimately, you're going to need to be confident enough to understand the financials. And so I talk about that as an example. Certainly, strategic planning. I think I break down communication skills, written, verbal, interpersonal, presentation. So, what I'm trying to do is create a framework through this checklist, if you will, is to encourage nonprofit leaders to look at a self assessment tool like this. And on an annual basis, I ask the question where are your strengths? This is not an exercise to beat you up on what you're not confident. It's equally important that you lift up. If you're a gifted speaker, let's think about next year how we get you up on stage, so to speak, get you in front of audiences because you have a message to share. Now, on the other hand, if you're not as confident about financial matters, then we need to find out a way for you to get better. Ultimately, I chased an MBA because I wanted to fully arm myself with kind of business knowledge and financial acumen to the extent I could. But the point is, self-assessment will help you get better, and that's why I've devoted some, time in the book on that exact concept.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And I talk a lot about in the work that I do that self-aware leaders are exceptional leaders. But it's
So true.
particularly as it pertains mostly to emotional intelligence. So the idea that obviously there's four core components of emotional intelligence, but we understand our own emotions and how they contend with the relationship of others. And so from that perspective, we're allowed to feel our feelings, but create that space of psychological safety within our organization where other people can voice their fears and their needs. And I think being able to be more self-aware of how we show up in the workplace can dictate not only the culture is such a broad term and it's dictated by a lot of things, but how we lead and how people follow us. Because I think I've heard a lot that leadership is the way that we inspire people. And
So
that
true.
starts with that idea of self-awareness.
Yeah, and I know you excel at this, Haley, you're right. There are management kind of textbook skills that are necessary to lead an organization, but what you're describing in terms of the EQ and the cultural aspects, frankly, the finesse necessary, I think is heightened in a nonprofit organization because often you're dealing with volunteers. Certainly, your board members are volunteers, so it's not like you have the kind of carrot or the stick of everybody's on salary. You have to be a very effective leader and get people to follow you who aren't getting paid. And that to me is
Mhm.
the ultimate test and what makes nonprofit leadership so challenging, but also so vital in our communities.
Yeah, I definitely think that is true. And you also talk about, and I think it comes to this idea of self awareness. How do you elevate your overall productivity in your professional setting? I know from my own experience, I have an idea of this idea of emotional intelligence and allowing people to voice their fears and their needs and creating that psychological safety allows for that increased productivity and raising revenue. But I would love your perspective on how you coach people to be their most productive selves.
That's funny you say that. I did a presentation at North Carolina State University around the topic of productivity, Atomic Habits. The recent book that everybody seems to have read has amplified that focus. And I think we have to distinguish between productivity, not meaning just, I got to get more done,
Yeah.
which, as you noted, we don't need more stress in our lives. And sometimes productivity, I think, gets equated to stress. I got get more things checked off my list today. I simply coach people around, do you have a system that allows you to comfortably capture all of the input coming into your life? Okay.
Mm.
And David Allen, his great book, Getting Things Done, talks about stress-free productivity. And what his suggestion is, not trying to get more done as if you're in a race, but do you have a system that allows you to capture everything so you're not stressed about, and Haley, I've done that. You're driving home and you're like, I know I forgot to do something. I know I forgot to call somebody or respond to somebody's email. And so for me, productivity is developing your system on capture, prioritization, and then a system to get it done. If I'm hiring someone, that's the question I'm asking. I don't care what app you use or calendar or to-do list, but I need to know you can handle the volume. I need to know you have a system to regularly review the volume and make sure that most important stuff makes it to the top, and then that you have a method to get it done. To me, it sounds basic, but I find a lot of folks are still struggling with, and maybe that's what you referred to too, Haley, the stress we see some of our nonprofit friends. I just think they haven't found a method to get ahead of the volume.
Yeah. And I see this in my own life where at 10 p.m. at night, I'm trying to go to bed. And then that one thing that I was supposed to do
Your
comes
brain
into
won't.
my brain. Yeah. But I think that's an important point. And I think we have this idea of scarcity in the nonprofit sector. And I think that plays into that role of this idea that we have to do it all. Like we have to do it all. If we don't, we won't have enough resources or we won't be able to deliver on our mission. And I think not only having a system in place to be able to prioritize what is important, but also having this idea of what in our role as a CEO or fundraiser do we have to do, what's part of our expectations, and what can we also delegate. And I
Such a
think
good point.
delegation is hard because we have that scarcity mindset. And so what are your thoughts on empowering people around that thought of building a team around them that they can then delegate responsibility to? And it
I use,
doesn't have to be paid. It could also be volunteers as well.
great point. I use the phrase all the time, highest value role. The organization needs you to be accomplishing your highest value role. I'm impressed that you're trying to do everything, but is it literally your highest value role? So I do a little pie chart exercise. And I'm like, all right, let's talk about the reality of how you spend your time. And then I also say, all right, but let's draw a second circle and divide the pie chart is how might you achieve your highest value role? And often people will come to that kind of quick conclusion, like, yeah, I'm spending half my time doing relatively minor stuff that volunteers would happily do, or I could delegate to some of my talented teammates. Because if I'm the senior officer or the chief fundraiser, I need to be out there building relationships with donors, right? And yet, often I find folks that have that talent are stuck in doing other things. So I just reinforce that concept of what is your highest value role? And often people, if they step back and say, yeah, you're right. I need to be in front of the folks who can invest in our mission and make it happen. And so anything that's not that, can I delegate it or do I need to do it at all? Sometimes is a reality check that's helpful.
Ooh, I love that question. I think it's such a powerful one to really enable people to do their roles and give permission to focus on the things that will have that return on investment, whether it's investing in their clients or investing in the relationships with their donors or their board members or community members. I think that's so important to focus on. And not a lot of people take that time to step back and focus on
Agreed.
that.
It's hard when your head's down, you're just trying to get through today. It's hard to step back sometimes and think about it, but I would encourage folks to try it.
So I read this book, Future is Good, by Trista Harris, and she was also a local speaker at an equity summit here. And she talked a lot about how nonprofit leaders need to create space to think about the future. Because a lot of times we are so focused on the now, we're so focused on our to-do list, and we're often reactionary. And again, it comes back to that scarcity mindset, for lack of a better term. But how do you coach nonprofit leaders to take space to think about the future and become more proactive?
I love that question. In every mastermind group, literally once a week, I say something like, Have you carved out any time for yourself before we meet again? Will you literally put some time on your calendar? And most of them are like, what do you mean? No, I'm busy. And I'm like, you need to. And I think if you start the practice, is it just taking the last hour of the day and not allowing meetings to occur? That might be a step in the direction that you just noted, because the organizations particularly need their leaders to be more long-term in their thinking. It's exactly what she said in her book, and that's what we need. And so I've found that if I can just encourage them, carve out, do some reading, do some writing, do some thinking, your organization will benefit. It's not going to be the grind that you now experience that's going to move the organization forward. Take some of that time to talk to aspirational leaders around the country or things like that I think have longer potential. But that's the way I approach it. And the mastermind program, if nothing else, I'm forcing people to spend some time in a Zoom room outside of their day-to-day job. And then I'm like, hey, the program's over. Why don't you keep doing this? Why don't you keep this 90-minute block on your calendar every 2 weeks? And I think people are like, you know what? That might help.
Yeah, and I think some people just need permission to do it. Like I had a conversation with someone yesterday and literally I was like, oh, no, I don't know why in my brain I thought, oh, you said that. Now I have permission to go and do it.
Exactly.
I knew I needed to do it. Yeah.
Because Haley, if they don't put it on, their calendar will fill up on its own. We all know that. They're busy. There always will be something. You have to be proactive, put it on your calendar, invest in yourself. It'll pay off.
Are there any actionable deliverables or actionable steps that you advise nonprofit leaders or listeners that are listening to this podcast to take today?
Coach and be coached. And you, I know, are an advocate of this as well. But notice I'm saying in both directions. I think no matter where you are in your journey, there's someone that could coach you that maybe just has a little bit more experience or different experience. I'm not saying necessarily an older coach. I've seen some really powerful coaching relationships from a younger generation helping an older generation. So consider the power of who could you turn to for actual coaching, not just friend and family support, but like you said earlier, coaching, accountability, strategy partner, and so forth. But then go the other direction too. There is somebody behind you on your path that could use your help. And there's power in teaching, using your experience to help someone else. That works both ways. Obviously, you're helping someone who maybe is a little more junior than you, and that's great. The sector needs that. But I bet you'll find there's equal reward in working with someone and helping someone that maybe benefits you as well. So I encourage that kind of, again, that's my go-to phrase, coach and be coached. And I think you'll be better off because of it.
Oh, I love that. And I think that's a great way to wrap up our conversation and give people permission to coach and be coached. And where can people find you to learn more about the work that you do?
Well, grateful. You can find me on LinkedIn. Patton McDowell on LinkedIn is where I'm most hang out in terms of the social channels. And our website is pmanonprofit.com, pmanonprofit.com. And you can find out more about our mastermind program, my book, and some of the other resources and programs that we offer.
Well, we will be linking to all that in the show notes. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. You are such a gift to me and all of our listeners, and I am just so inspired by you.
Thank you, Haley. It's my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
If you have valued these stories or learned something from what you've heard, please share this podcast episode or follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your support, and together we can build a better community and world.